Hello.
Hey, hold that!
Hello, and welcome to the first episode of BrandonBits, starring me, Brandon Blankenburg. In today's episode, I'm going to be focusing on the Jesse Boomer Trilogy, the third book of which was just released on March 25th and is available for purchase on Amazon.com in both digital and paperback form. Growing up, I always had a fondness for writing. In my free time, if I wasn't watching a movie or spending time with friends, I was most likely in my room writing a ridiculous horror story or Godzilla fanfiction. Unfortunately, as writing became more commonly associated with schoolwork, my enjoyment of the pastime waned. I eventually gave it up for a spell, and didn't really do much except for draw occasionally when not staring at the TV. Eventually, I got back into writing, but primarily stuck with poetry. Then, in 2008, I found myself stuck in a dead-end warehouse job that went through some changes, making the work environment become much more hostile. In response to this, I decided to finally put pencil to paper again as a way to alleviate my frustrations. Soon, I found myself writing the first pages to what would turn out to be my first book, Jesse's Conveyance. Originally, the book was going to be about the main character having hallucinations of a talking kangaroo that gets him to change his life little by little, all the while becoming more and more agitated with those around him, and finally snapping when the kangaroo turns out to be a demon that convinces him to become a serial killer. However, the more I wrote the book, the more I wanted to stray from the horror element and stick with a general fiction story about self-discovery, change, and escaping the confines of everyday living. A horror climax just didn't have a place in the book anymore. While it has its dark moments, overall, it's a rather quaint and pleasant dramedy. After writing Jesse's Conveyance, which took 3 years to finally complete, I focused on a few horror books, but I couldn't stop thinking about the book I originally wanted to write, and kept wondering how I could pick up where Conveyance left off, and write a horrific sequel that still gelled with the original. Then, it dawned on me, I could make it a trilogy, using the second book to make the transition from contemporary fiction to horror. Thus, the writing of Jesse's Influence began. The beginning to Jesse's Influence is quite similar in tone to Conveyance, but through its course becomes a completely different beast, with an emphasis on social commentary, what being evolved really means, survival, and natural history. The tone goes from light and humorous to dark and foreboding, making it quite the genre-defying little book with a lot to say. This brings me to Jesse's Legacy, the final book in the Jesse Boomer trilogy. Even though the horror genre is my specialty, I consider this book to not only be my darkest yet, but most likely the darkest one I ever write. While it might not be as outlandish as the original climax I had in mind for Jesse's Conveyance, it still delves pretty deeply into the mind of someone with an extremely violent hidden nature, serving as both a psychological horror story and macabre character study. Considering some of the locations, it even has some gothic elements. I'm very proud of the book and feel it serves as a satisfying conclusion to the Jesse Boomer trilogy, which, more or less, is a good representation of the original book I had in mind those 10 years ago when I first started writing Jesse's Conveyance. So if you're in the mood for an unconventional book series that encompasses a variety of genres, please consider giving the Jesse Boomer trilogy a try.
Okay!